Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week of anatomy and physiology. In this topic this week, we are going to cover the muscles of the thigh. So let's dive straight in and let's talk about our learning goals first. Our learning goals. The first is to learn the muscles of the anterior, posterior, and medial thigh. Second, to identify the origin, insertion, and actions of each muscle. Then lastly, we're going to apply some of the knowledge that we learned and answer some questions in class. And you guys will also be required to complete a quiz and upload that onto Canvas. So let's dive right in and let's talk about the muscles of the thigh. So our outline here, we're going to cover three main sections of our thigh: anterior, medial, and posterior. But before we jumping into muscles and talking about each individual muscle, let's talk about some of the actions that we're going to see. Right. So as we know, the hip is comprised of two important bones, the acetabulum and also the femoral head. They come together to create a ball and socket joint, which is known as our hip joint. Okay. So I want you guys to think about what actions the hip can perform. They perform 6 separate actions, but this week we're only going to kind of focus on about 3 or 4 of them. But so keep in mind and jot down the actions that the hip can perform, and we'll cover that at the end of class before we leave. So let's jump right in and start talking about our anterior muscles. Okay, so the one group of muscles that we want to highlight here are our quadriceps. Our first quadricep muscle is going to be called our rectus femoris. Okay, it is the powerhouse muscle of the quadriceps. It does a lot of the work in helping extend the knee. Okay, so its origin is going to be the anterior iliac spine. Its insertion will be the tibial tuberosity. But what makes this muscle so special is that since it crosses the hip and also crosses the knee, it will focus on 2 separate actions, which is hip flexion as well as knee extension. So now let's talk about 2 other muscles that are really important, also helping out with knee extension. The first is called the vastus medialis, which is located on the inside part of the quadriceps region. And the second is the vastus lateralis, which is located more on the outside. The medialis will originate from the femoral shaft, while the lateralis originates from the greater trochanter. They will both come together along with the rectus femoris and insert on our tibial tuberosity, which is a pretty hard bump right below our kneecap. All 3 of these muscles, all of our quadricep muscles, will perform one common action, and that is knee extension. So if you ever look at extending your knee, the muscles that help you do this are going to be your quadriceps. Now, in this slide, we're going to see a picture. Okay. Anytime we talk about knee extension, we always want to remember that the quadriceps is the main muscle that helps out with knee extension. We've all seen the Rockettes dancers before do their kick line, and as you see, their knees are completely locked out on both of them, left and right, and they're doing that by contracting and activating their quadricep muscles. So your rectus femoris, your vastus lateralis, and your vastus medialis. So now let's jump into our medial muscles, and these are my favorite. And this group is a very group to memorize. One, because they all have the same origin, insertion, and action. So let's jump into talking about our adductor brevis, longus, and magnus. They all share the same origin, which is the pubis, the same insertion, which is the linea aspera, and they all perform together hip adduction. So as we look here in this first picture on the left of the screen, we can see our adductor magnus, which is our big guy here, our adductor longus, and then our adductor brevis, which is hiding right in the back. Now let's see if we can watch this video here and help you guys understand what the adductors really do. So here we can see this young lady here performing a hip adduction exercise using a resistance band. Okay, so the muscles that she's targeting with this exercise here are the adductor brevis, adductor magnus, and also the adductor longus. So all 3 muscles together will perform the same action of hip adduction. All right. So as you can see here, she's moving her leg inward toward her body, which is going to be a deduction of the hip. So now let's move on to our posterior muscles. And these guys are very, 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 very important. Okay, so we call these muscles our hamstrings, but they're split into the biceps femoris, as well as the semimembranosus and semitendinosus. So our first guy here is called our biceps femoris. This muscle is located on the lateral aspect of the posterior thigh. So it's going to be on the most outer part of your posterior thigh. Since it has two heads, so the word biceps means two, right? Bi means two, seps meaning head. It has two separate heads. The long head will originate from the ischial tuberosity. The short head will originate from the linea aspera, and they will both insert on the fibular head, which is on the lateralmost aspect of our lower leg complex. Together, the biceps femoris will perform hip extension as well as knee flexion. So as we look here in this picture, we can see the first picture here where my mouse is on will show the long head of the biceps femoris, and the picture on the right will show the short head of the biceps femoris. So the long head will sit on top of the short head. Typically, the long head of a muscle is always bigger than the short head. As you guys know, we cover that in the upper extremity with the bicep. It's kind of somewhat similar, with the long head being a little bit bigger and more massive inside, have more muscle mass than the short head. The next muscles in our posterior hamstrings are our semimembranosus and tendinosus. But before we jump into these guys, I just want to help you guys orient on where each one is. So if we start with this picture on the right, here is the highlighted muscle is our semimembranosus, our semitendinosus, excuse me. The one on the bottom on the left is called our semimembranosus. So we have semimembranosus on the bottom and then semitendinosus on the top. So how can you tell the difference? Well, your semimembranosus is always going to be bigger than your semitendinosus. And one way you can kind of remember this, if you write out each word, the word semimembranosus is going to be a lot longer than the word semitendinosus. So that you should know that semimembranosus will always sit on the bottom, and then semitendinosus will sit on top. Both of these muscles share a similar origin, which is the ischial tuberosity. They will both insert on the medial tibial condyle, and they will perform hip extension as well as hip flexion. All right. So again, let's just go over this our hamstring muscles one more time. We have our biceps femoris, which is on the lateral aspect. Then we have our semimembranosus and tendinosus, which is on the medial aspect. And both of these muscles, all three of these muscles together, are called the hamstrings, and they will perform hip extension as well as hip flexion and knee flexion. So as we look at this picture here, some of you guys may watch football. We look at this picture, and this picture shows, right, we see hip extension and as well as knee flexion, right? So the hamstrings are helping out with hip extension and as well as knee flexion. All right. So again, guys, that's all we have for this week. This is a really short video. Please make sure that you guys download the quiz that is attached under the thigh muscle module on Canvas. Make sure you download it, answer all of the questions, upload it back onto Canvas under that module. And if you have any questions or concerns at any time, please send me an email and I'll make sure I get back to you as soon as I can. Have a great week and God bless.